Hey everyone, welcome back to Devs in the Shed. We're all here today. So myself, Matt, I'm a TAM at AWS, and we've got Paul and Aaron, both solution architects at AWS. If you haven't met us before, everyone that's joined as a regular, welcome back to the stream. Let us know where you're all from. Really excited to see who from around the world is joining us today. So call out in the comments and feel free to ask anything as we go through this. Now, we don't usually do too much AWS news, but I know, Paul, you're excited about a particular feature, aren't you, that's come out recently?
Yeah, well, I think it was like quite a few months ago, we did a session on AWS App Runner. And for anybody that's not aware, App Runner is, I guess, it feels like an evolution of like Beanstalk. App Runner enables you to run containerized workloads. So, one of the 17 ways to run containerized workloads. But do that like really simply, like it'll set up the SSL certificate for you. It'll provision the infrastructure. You provided like a very easy set of configuration to like pass in environment variables or where you want it to scale and scale up or down. It collects logs for you and puts it in a certain area. But it also enables you to provision Python and Node.js apps as well. They're supported as well. So you don't even need to have containerized your application. You can just have a Node or a Python app sitting in a repo, connect that repo to App Runner, and you've got automatically you've got CI/CD. So the moment you merge it into your master branch, App Runner will pick that code up. It'll build and package the application and go ahead and deploy it. It does proper blue-green deployments. So if it fails the health check, it'll roll back to the earlier version. It was good. It's a good little application. It's a good little way to get started in AWS. When it came out, we played with it like a bit, but the most requested feature and the most complained about lack for that MVP of the release of App Runner was lack of VPC support. So what that meant was, for any application that you're building that you didn't have, that wasn't using something like maybe DynamoDB, you had to make a call out effectively over the public internet back to your database and make that connection. There were some workarounds like whitelisting of the IP addresses and so forth, but it was a bit of a pain to do that. But last week they released VPC support for App Runner, so I'll share my screen now, and and we can sort of go through that. Let me just do that. So window. Did you want to bring that up, Matt?
Yeah, I'll just bring it up now, actually. It should pop up for everyone.
Yeah, so there's this blog post here, and I'll paste this into the commentary. So this is new for App Runner, like obviously like VPC support here. And Danilo has written a really great blog post about like building some sort of application that runs. And so he goes through all of the steps to go ahead and do that. He's used an EC2 instance to make sure that you can see within your VPC whether you can connect to that RDS instance and pre-populate that RDS instance. So you've got like some data in the database. You configure the tables, you insert some sample data. And then he's built like a sample Python application that interacts with that RDS instance in that specific database. He's using good practices such as environment variables, so you can pass all of those variables into App Runner. If you're building this locally or you need to shift it between different environments, you can go ahead and configure all of that. But yeah, he takes through all of the steps that enable you to configure an application that builds from a source code repository. So you'd have to fork this sample application and on GitHub and then hook your GitHub up to App Runner. And yeah, of course, then now you can go ahead and deploy this application and have App Runner control like CI/CD, the deployment, the scaling, the build of your application, but you can have it, communicate over a private VPC to that RDS instance running within your account. So I thought this was a worthwhile feature to go ahead and talk about. Every time we talk about App Runner or we show it, there are a lot of people are interested in what is happening here. Like when we talk about containerized applications, there's so much emphasis on Kubernetes and ECS. Like those are great platforms when you are building large services and large applications, or you've got like a whole bunch of maturity within your organization and teams that are comfortable and familiar with supporting those environments. But App Runner is something that's like, I guess, a little suited to people that want to get up and start running really, really fast. So if you've got that little idea, you can go ahead and configure an environment. without having to shift to a completely serverless mindset. If you've got something that needs to be server-side rendered, it's a perfect entry point for building that application. I did a talk about App Runner at AWS Innovate last year, and I had my .NET applications that were running within App Runner, communicating backwards and forwards with DynamoDB, and you can see it performs really, really well. It builds, it deploys. I'm able to have like my manifest stored within ECR, so I can go ahead and deploy that container where I need to, so I can run it locally and run it in the cloud. And I just thought that this was a worthwhile release to talk about today. And maybe next week we might go into configuring a basic VPC, an RDS instance, and running through one of these examples and showing you all how that can work. And in under an hour you can have like CI/CD, VPC set up, RDS instance, and your application interacting with the private database within your VPC. So yeah, I definitely thought that was worth bringing up today.
What do you think the biggest advantage to running App Runner in a VPC, so supporting a VPC, would be?
It would be communicating with those anything that was running within your account. So whether that be some sort of like private API, if it was, for example, like you're running MSK, you can Kafka, you can interact with Kafka over your VPC. RDS instances, of course, like that's probably the biggest use case that people are going to be wanting and have been wanting and requesting, is to be able to access their RDS instances over their own private VPC. But interaction with anything else within your VPC. So obviously, if you're sitting within a VPC, then you can leverage Transit Gateway. You can have interconnected accounts. It just like raises security posture and raises the application or the way you can use App Runner to a whole new level. It is not something that is just like a proof of concept. It is not just an MVP. It is a proper usable service now that you can use, within like larger scale organizations and larger scale platforms.
Excellent. And I did share our original video on App Runner, right? So if you do want to watch a little bit on how to set it up, go ahead and watch that. I did have a look at the calendar, actually, Paul, and next week it's up to one of us to show something off. So if you do make something with App Runner in the background over the next week, go for it. We can make it part of the show. The week afterwards, we've got some Tesla and Raspberry Pi fun potentially.
Yep.
So it's in 2 weeks' time. But next week it's on us. So that could be really cool.
Awesome.
Now, the other thing that I was going to say is we've moved from one person in a cabin to somebody in a cabin and somebody in a shed with a much clearer camera. So I have to say, like, you've got a few bikes in the background, Aaron. The audience is probably interested in, what they are. I see one's a Harley.
I think, when we did the location service, I went through. There's got the Harley 883 with the 1200 mod engine, and my Yamaha XJ6. Currently, it's a R6 refurbished engine in a R6 XJ6 frame. Putting it back.
Yeah,
together.
no, that's pretty awesome. And I think today you've got some stuff that you'd like to run through with us as well. You've been showing Amplify Studio to a few customers.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about it. I mean, we've looked at Amplify a couple of times, right? And I think we did talk about Studio one episode before Christmas. But it's kind of like a really fast way to build a cloud-enabled app, with a front-end interface now, right? Because it integrates with Figma, if I remember correctly.
Correct. Yes, and that's probably the most powerful new release is the Amplify Studio UI. It's currently in preview, but the UI builder. The reason I've been sort of demoing it to many customers recently is because a lot of large enterprises looking for no code, low code type situations to be able to build out apps quickly without having to do a lot of the hands-on development and coding. So I've put together just a very simple proof of concept because I want to show actually how low code it is. If we share my screen, I'll just demo.
I'll bring it up.
I've got a little app here that I'll actually run through the code side of it, but I really want to spend a little bit more time in the actual Amplify Studio side of it. This doesn't look like much, but when I jump into the code in a sec, you'll actually see how much is being done by Amplify. I have not applied any CSS, any styling to an application. Basically, all I've done so far is I've gone into Amplify, created a new through the console, created a new app, and then jumped into Amplify Studio, created some data, added some data, so the actual price, location, and images.
So where are these houses located? I would love to buy a $27 house.
That's 27 million.
I go by the decimal point, right?
Yeah,
so
the
it's
dots in the wrong
$27, and then like a couple of like 12 digits of cents that I've got to pay.
Yeah. So these are randomly selected images from Google Image Search and some seeded data, which I'll take you through very shortly. But call
out on the chat though if that's one of your houses.
Yeah.
So apologies if it is.
We want to come and visit. We'll do an episode from your garage. So it's a fully functional component. So at the moment, I can scroll. I've got 5 records that I can scroll between. I should have added more, but at the moment I've got 5. We've got like an aligned menu and a footer. Like basically, I will jump into the code side of that to show you how much I've done. So from a coding. Say again.
Is that a React application?
Yeah. So this is a React app. All I've done. And you'll be able to see through the actual green and orange. Everything that's white is non-modified. Everything that's green is been added, and everything that's orange means it's been modified. All I've done, I didn't think. Okay, so the only thing that I've done to modify the CSS is remove the React CSS. All I've done is the standard React single-page application scaffold. So when you do your npx create React app, and then I've just called it demo, it's gone and installed the single-page application scaffold for building up my app. Now, the one step that I'll go through later that I've done is I've imported an existing Amplify application into this app, into this React app, so that it's pulled down all of the components. So you'll be familiar with the Amplify folder, which has all of the configuration for the backend. If we were to go into the CLI and start adding, Amplify add API or Amplify add storage, that's where the configuration is stored here locally. We can also then use the CLI to Amplify sync between what's on the server and what's local. What you won't have seen before, you will have seen models in terms of that's getting ahead of myself. GraphQL models. What you wouldn't have seen before is the UI components. So as part of the Amplify Studio creating front-end components, I've been able to pull down all of the components that are created in Amplify Studio. And then all I've done, so the modified files, is obviously the simple importing the Amplify UI React components and also the UI React styles. And then obviously the same thing that we do for every React Amplify application is import Amplify and import the actual AWS exports to join our back end with our front end application. That's all I've done in Index, and then all I've done in the app.js at this stage is got rid of what was already there, and I'm importing from my UI components. Now this will make a little bit more sense when I actually jump into the studio and start going through things, but all I'm doing is I'm importing my new homes component, my navbar component, and my marketing footer component, and then just rendering them out. And I'm saying for my new homes, I just want 3 items per page. So if we jump back to the actual app, now you can see I've got a fully functional navigation menu or a list of listings or a list of homes that I'm pulling from my database online in Amplify or in AWS and displaying through this component. So let's jump into Amplify Studio and have a closer look at what these UI components are and how they work. To your point,
just as we go ahead, Aaron.
No, I was just going to say, to your point, that's where if you've got an account with Figma, this is where it really helps. You can actually get in and start building your own components. The actual Figma components themselves, and I'll show you in a minute, you can actually pull the code for those components on how to modify them. you can create the styling in the UI builder, and it comes with the component when you import them into your application. Was there something else you were going to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, has anyone played with Amplify Studio yet? Let us know in the chat. I did see Paul ask the question before: who's building anything? Who's building a front end in any other frameworks to React? Like, I know that a lot of people are using React currently, and I know that there's variations like Next for React. But wanted to see if there are any other popular front end frameworks out there that people are picking up.
I wonder whether that's more prolific use of other frameworks outside of Australia. Like, obviously my customers are, at the moment are all Australian, and every single one is using React or something they've got that's legacy. I haven't had anybody use anything other than that.
So I've got sorry, I cut you off. Go for it.
Someone's using MooTools. I remember that. I think that was some sort of Yahoo thing or something, wasn't it?
I don't think I've ever used MooTools. I've got customers globally. So again, the same. I find that a lot of my customers are using React. However, the customers that I interact with on a more global scale are using Angular quite often, as well as React. I think the big difference between, say, Angular and React in this instance is that React being a library, while as Angular being a framework, building out smaller modular components is a lot easier in React. But then when we're talking about something like a single page application, Angular can be used just as well for that's what it's built for. For those who've never used Amplify Studio before, the easiest way to get into it is when you're in the AWS console. You'd go, once you've created an app, just go into the backend environments and click on the Launch Studio. So I can close, I won't close it, but if you click Launch Studio, all it's going to do is launch the actual Amplify Studio for the app that you've created. Qualifying that with, you don't actually have to have, you do have to have an account to start creating the Amplify app. You don't have to have an account to be able to get into Amplify Studio. So you can create users, administrative users, to come in and build and modify content in Amplify Studio without the need for an AWS account. They can log directly into Amplify Studio. So what I'll do quickly before I jump into the actual UI library and taking a look at the Figma synchronization side of things, what I've done is, you may remember when Amplify Studio was admin UI, it did have the same capabilities in terms of creating data structures. So all I've done is I've actually jumped in and created a very simple data structure. In this case, it's a single non-relational table for basically homes. I want to, obviously, we want to have a primary key, so we've used ID. All I need at this stage is the address, the price, and an image URL that I want to display. Probably I would be using a S3 image, S3 location if I was building this whole thing out as my application. But for now, I've just gone and searched out Google Images and pulled in image locations on the publicly available web. To create a model backed by DynamoDB, it's as simple as adding a model, calling it what you want, adding fields. You can actually create relationships between your tables as well, so you can set the foreign key relationship. Amplify will then actually use the graphical representation that you've built your model out with to go and back the model with the database in the back end, so that you don't actually have to do any of that configuration. It's similar to how you would go through and you do your add Amplify storage, or in this case, add Amplify API and selecting GraphQL, which would set up the app sync side of things and the back-end model. All of that's happening for you under the hood without you actually having to go and configure anything out. So I'm going to not create that model, and I'm going to quickly jump into content. One of the really cool features, I think, Matt, you called this out in last week's session in terms of what you were doing with seeding data, using a library to seed data. One of the really cool features of the actual content manager is the ability to see data. So what I did to create these 5 records is, instead of going through and manually creating, click create home, add a record, click create home, is I go up to actions and I've said auto generate data. Now I can also stick with that. Auto generate data. I went and select 5 records and I added a constraint. So I actually want my data to look somewhat similar to what a real record would look like. The constraint that I've selected is on address. I've said I want that to be from the pre-defined types, a street address. And then I've added another constraint of price.
Yep.
And I want that to be, I don't know where float has gone, but that was a float. And that one's not going to work. And then generate the data, and it'll go through and actually generate the somewhat real looking addresses. And in this case, I was generating floats. And then all I was left with was an empty column of image URL. And I went into Google, copied the URL, and just updated the record with the URL of the image. And that's it. I've seeded my database with data. It's now stored in DynamoDB. If we went into the AWS console, went and looked at DynamoDB, we can see the data there, but we can also manage it all through our Amplify Studio manager.
Yeah,
Right.
I was going to say just on this, we did cover Faker last week, and Amplify actually is using Faker behind the scenes for this as well, right? So we've got our own little server that's running that produces the data using the Faker library. So the Amplify team's been pretty transparent on that. I did see someone say, was that the NPM breach recently? It wasn't a breach, more that the owner was trying to make a point of like donating to open source, and it didn't go down too well. But like you can version lock your version of Faker, and I think Faker has been taken over by the community admins now, actually. So the person that originally made it has kind of moved out, and the community's taken it over. So it's going to have a bit more governance on making sure that you don't get, the wrong fake data, in a sense. So yeah, I just saw the comments, and I was like, I'll jump on that. But Amplify is using a locked version of Faker in the back end to do this. Yeah.
Important thing there is version locked.
Yeah.
So to that, we obviously test everything before we push it into a product. So that's why everything is version locked. We're not just going to take the rolling community updates. And it's the same with all of our open source community stuff as well. Obviously, when you get into the Amplify GitHub, you'll see lots of pull requests, lots of issues, and there's people in the community and within the service team actively reviewing, checking security, pulling those commits in. If they align with the roadmap, or if they align with what we're trying to fix or implement. And there is a great community support on top of Amplify as well out there, people developing, forking, developing integrations and the like. I'll quickly just cover off, essentially, I'm not going to go through the rest of what's capable in the Amplify Studio, other than to say the same as what you would do in the CLI. You can go through and you can create your functions. You can create your GraphQL API, your REST API, all of those things that are capable of doing through the CLI, as we've demonstrated previously, are capable of going through and building through the graphical UI.
Well, the other point here is like you're using like fake data to kind of seed your application, right? But ultimately, this could pull through like AppSync to DynamoDB, or like API Gateway and Lambda through to RDS, so you can kind of use your own data sources, right? And
exactly,
I think the thing that you're going to bring together at the end is like, here's your UI design that the graphics designer's done in Figma for you. Here's the data that's coming from the database. And then us as a developer, all that we're doing is basically like doing a little bit of the stitching, but Amplify is going to do the heavy duty work to kind of bring it together and have it run in our web app quickly, right?
Spot on. Absolutely. Yep. The thing here is the stitching it all together is done by Amplify, and all we have to do is drop the components in. As I showed you in the code, I've dropped in 3 components, and that's the only coding that I've done. I'll jump over to the UI library now. What you're not going to see is when you first open the UI library, there's a welcome page with, do you want to use Figma to sync and stuff. What you're actually going to see is I've already imported a UI library from Figma. So that step, I'm not going to be able to take you through, but just be assured that when you're actually going through that welcome page, you'll be able to jump over to Figma, set up an account, take the Amplify UI community kit, make modifications to it, and then re-import it. So that's what I've done here is I've actually used the pre-built Figma Amplify UI kit, and I'm just going to quickly jump over because that's what would have happened, and quickly take you through the kit, like what's available and what we're looking at. So for those who haven't used Figma, you've actually got a bit of a walkthrough in the kit in the README that actually takes you through what it is that you're looking at, how to use it, and how it interacts with Amplify from syncing from Figma back into Amplify. But the things that I want to show specifically is if you're starting from scratch, this is what you would essentially do. So we've got built out, oops, I've double clicked, our primitives. So our primitives are all of the atomic components or the primitive components that we want to be able to use in our component library to create our UI components that we then sync and bring into Amplify Studio to then start modifying and linking to our data sources and turning into actual functional components. So the Amplify UI community kit actually has a range of primitives for you to be able to use, from the radio buttons, as you can see, headers, checkboxes, the standard components that you would use in UI development for web apps. All right, this is the cool part. Actually, before I jump to the cool part, examples of the components to demonstrate what you can do with them, how they can be used. These, when we sync, aren't going to be pulled into UI Studio. These are there just for you to get an understanding of, UI development. How is the user experience going to be for a specific component that I develop when it's displayed as a list? Or how am I going to develop a page with a feature call out and a list? And so you can actually see some examples that have been developed for you of the components that exist inside the Figma. So we've got a range of pre-built components that you can modify, delete. If you wanted to start with all of the primitives, get rid of all of these and start building your own, you can, or you can actually start to modify the existing components we've got there. So I'm going to show you two things. The demo the app that I've showed you is using one of the existing components here, but I'm going to show you how simple it is to actually build. So this is part of the Figma community kit. This is the Figma community kit. What I've done is I've taken a copy of the Figma community kit into my account, and I'm now modifying it a copy of the Figma community kit in my Figma account.
Yep. No, and I was gonna say, a graphic designer might build everything in Photoshop themselves. They might use the community kit. They might use a different template. They might decide that they want a material design, a material UI design across the app, or a metro design across the app, whatever it is, right? They can basically bring all this in. This is really just a quick getting started. You can build your own components, and then you just map the resources to the right data sources when you kind of stitch it all together, right?
Yep. So I can tell you also that the AWS marketing team, so this is the global AWS marketing team who developed the AWS website and other components and the like for public marketing, they use Figma for their UX and UI design. So there's only a few small things that you need to remember to take from a UX UI design to make it importable into Amplify, and I'll run through that in a sec. But Figma is being used in our service teams. Figma is being used everywhere. As long as your UX and UI designers know how to work with Figma, then they're getting you a step closer to actually building out your web apps without having to go through traditional, whether it's in Photoshop or whether it's in AI or one of the other.
Always Photoshop to Dreamweaver. That's how you do it. Way back in the day, for me it was actually Sketch, and then Figma came out. So I was using Sketch for some time.
So before Sketch, I was using what was it? Not Acrobat. What's AI? Adobe's
InDesign.
InDesign for books. Yep. No, AI for vectors and everything. I can't even remember. I remember it was called AI.
There was Illustrator, right?
It was Illustrator. Well. Adobe Illustrator. That's what it was.
Yep.
So in Illustrator, I would get files, vector files and stuff, and I would actually have to take those vector files and rasterize some of them to make them images, or figure out, well, these components don't need to be built. You can actually do this in CSS. There's no need to actually pull all of this imagery into what we're doing for the web, whether we're using Dreamweaver or whatever it was back in the day. I used Hotdog for one app once when that first came out. Anyway, so there's no need for all of what you see to be done as imagery. Yeah, some of it's CSS. That's what Figma does here. So Figma, as we're actually building it out, when we import it into the Amplify Studio, it's giving us our underlying CSS. It's giving us our underlying React code so that we can then import them into the application and just start using them. So the most important thing to remember to actually create a component that will import. So obviously the primitives, the examples, the README stuff, we don't want to import that into Amplify Studio. So all we do is we go and we create a frame. Anything with a frame will import because it considers anything with a frame to be a component. We create our frame, and then we can select from our list of primitives. So I'm going to add a header to this frame, heading 1. Now, actually, this is going to be really big, because if you see the size of the other components here, these are actually standard. You can see the size here in pixels, 20 by 358.
Maybe can you zoom in a little bit?
I'll zoom in.
Yeah,
I'll zoom in, and I'll make this much, not that one. I'll make this much smaller. So let's bring the header align. Now, there's some pretty cool things that you can do with Figma in terms of auto aligning and the way that you structure your components. So we want to create auto layout. So the auto layout is saying, well, there's only one primitive here, so I'm just going to put the frame around what I'm doing. We could also then grab a primary button and say we're going to add a button to this. And now the auto layout is saying, well, let's align it to, because it's set to left justified, it's going to align it. Let's just leave it as that for now. Let's rename this frame. Actually, we can create it as a component first and then rename it. So let's just resize this. Oop, I've already got auto layout on, so let's just resize this down to size we want. And all we need to do is selecting all the components. You can group them, or you can select the whole group and do create component.
Yep.
And now that whole frame has been turned into a component. Now let's just call this AS comp. So A, so that'll be at the top, and my initials. All right, that's it. So I've created a component. I'm no UX UI designer. I'm not even a front end web developer. So I've only dabbled when it comes to the front end stuff. So all we need to do now that we've actually saved that or created that, you'll see it under my components. We should have a component called AS comp. We can jump over here and see. Okay, so we can see AS comp has a button, has a heading, and that's a component. Now what we do is we're going to jump back to Amplify Studio. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to do sync with Figma. So I've already set up in my Figma settings. I've already set up the link to my Figma project, which I've taken from the Amplify UI kit, and sync. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to go and look at all of the components, so all of the components that are based on a frame, and compare them to what we've got already imported. So if there's anything new, obviously it's going to import everything new. You can step through and accept individual changes of components. So if you want to sync everything in, but actually you don't want to accept, say, these components, no, I don't want to, I can reject those. Or we can just say accept all. So changes to all of the components that you've made, and any new ones are going to be pulled in. I don't see. There we go. AS component. It's there now.
Cool. I did see a comment that you need more pop and rounded corners. It made me. I'm having flashbacks here because I didn't use Dreamweaver to begin with. Like when I was in school, Dreamweaver was something we moved to like later on. I was just looking at like front page, I think that's what they had us
I
develop
remember that.
web pages in when I was like in grade 6 or 7 or whatever.
That
I
was
also
yes.
remember modernizing a huge app
Yeah.
where the business was asking for a long time, can you round the corners? And we went through everything and rounded every corner, and the app looks super fresh.
No, scroll and marquee. That's where it's at.
So that was my experience as well. It started with front page, but then we were told, we need to add more, flair to it. And we found that the free edition the preview edition of Dreamweaver, when it first came out, had all of these pre-built components that we could use in the same way, which is basically just applying CSS styling and stuff. So, and yeah, that was when I'm talking about front-end web development, this is back when I was in school. So,
yeah.
Anyway, so you can see I now have a component ready to start integrating with our application. Now, instead of integrating this one, I can show you what isn't there, so that when we jump over to the other one that I've actually integrated, you'll be able to see what is there. All right. At this stage, the component properties are blank. If we go to our header, our component properties are blank again, component properties and child properties. These are the things that are important. So this is, if you know your attributes for like HTML, this is what we're actually modifying in the studio to then import into with the pre-designed code that's going to actually link to these into Amplify. Now, into our Amplify app. Let me jump back. And I chose for our app here, so that we've got price, we've got address, and we've got the image. I chose card B. That was one of the pre-existing components. If we go in and configure, and here is one that I prepared earlier. You can see if I go to image, all I've done is I've added a child property. So first of all, I've added a component property of, I gave it a name of home, and the type is the home data source. So remember that the data structure that we created before, we can set that as the type. So now what we want to do is we want to start selecting properties from that model to be able to use in our actual components. So that's exactly what we've done. For the property of source and of the image, we've set the value of selecting from the home model. So home, we're selecting the image URL from the home model. And that's going to link our data source with the source of the image to be home, like data source home, image URL. So that the property that gives us when we actually do the query, that's what it'll be looking for. The same thing that we've done for our group text. We've got our label. We've selected the property of label. We've given it a predefined string. So you can add strings. You don't have to have all model-based properties. So we've said price, and then we want to join that with, so plus add the model.price. And again, the last one was label property, home, address. Done. So we've now linked our actual individual component to our model. However, we want to go one step further. As you saw here, we actually have a collection. So we're actually 1, 2, 3, go to the next page, another 2, because we've only got 5 records. How do we get from one individual component to having a functional list? I'm glad you asked.
I was thinking I didn't ask.
It's as easy as we can see our component here. All we need to do up here, create collection, give our collection a name, and click create. And then when we do that, instead of clicking create, I'm going to jump through to the one that I prepared earlier called new homes and go into configure to see what you would see when you click create. Then you can actually select your list type. So do you want it in a list? Do you want it in a grid? So I've actually selected grid. If we had, if I went back into my code and said, I want 5. So let's do that. I want 5 instead of 3 per page. Reload the app.
Aaron, is the pagination making the call back? Is it retrieving 3 at a time, or is it retrieving them all and then just paginating client side?
That's a really good question. I believe it's actually doing the query and then paginating. So it's using AppSync under the hood. So the same way that you would use AppSync to then query DynamoDB, you'd do the query and then you'd paginate.
So it's doing a proper offset. Maybe we'll inspect, like, right-click inspect and have a look at it.
That is taking a long time to load. Is it not running? It's still compiling. There we go.
You need an i9 or something, or an M1.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm running on a Windows laptop. I apologize.
Well, I think actually 60% of the people that watch the stream use Windows. When I look at the behind the scenes dashboard, so we have it's a pretty fair split between Mac and Windows, and there's a couple of Linux users in there as well, which is nice.
Yep. Here you go. It's loaded. So I've got the grid layout that I've selected from Amplify Studio. I'm now displaying 5 results per page. So if we had more, it would paginate. Otherwise, we only have 1 page. And remember, I've done no CSS. So I've got a grid layout working without actually having to apply any of my own CSS. I can then, the last few properties of the collection, I can select the order. So is it running left to right and down, or is it running top to bottom and as columns? So basically rows or columns. And then I can specify the same as you would with any like CSS properties on attributes. Then we set our padding. I've basically set a padding of 10 around each of the individual components. You can set however you want it to display, and then you can set your X and Y alignment for the grid. That's it. The only thing that I will then show also is if we click on Get Component Code, there we go. I can, as I said before, I imported this application into my Create React app. All I did was after I did the npx Create React app is amplify, pull, gave it the app ID in the environment, and then it actually pulled down, and that's where it generated the UI components and the models. So the models are actually the underlying queries for so we're querying the home model. So this is how, when we selected home in the UI component, it knows to then go get the properties for price and the like, and the schema for that model. So here is our GraphQL schema for querying the data. And so we basically know what to link for the actual UI component. Let's take a quick look at the actual new homes component itself.
Yeah, because the pool would have just put that into a folder, right? Yeah,
exactly. So here's our card B component. So this is the card B component that, remember, I've modified it. You can see if we go to image, the source attribute now has the home model and the image URL. The same applies for, it's going to be harder to find because there's a few of them. Here we go. Price. Here's the price label. So all we've done is we've done an override for the child. We've specified, so this text has a label with price, and we've given it home.price. Obviously, for those not familiar with TypeScript, the question mark here is saying if this is not null, then select that property. So we don't want it to error out. So we're actually doing a null check so that we don't go bang, you've got a failure. There's no property in that model of that name. So that's the import I've just pulled down from Amplify. If we go back to here, and then how we use that component is demonstrated here. Import new homes, UI components, or if we're doing it through JSX, then we just use the actual new homes component in React as we would with any other component.
Aaron, if you were doing some specific tweaks to that you had to do, you had to handcraft the CSS. And when you push it back up, does it ever get overwritten? Like, I mean, the generated code there looks clean, and it doesn't look like some of the jumbled stuff we've seen before. But if you do some specific change, I don't know, some animation or something they have to do by hand, and you push it back up, will Figma or will it ever get overwritten? Like, how does it distinguish what you've done versus what it's done?
So when you do the import, it'll ask you, are you going to modify these things locally, these components locally? If you specify yes, then you can actually sync them back from your local back up to Amplify Studio.
Okay.
You can then do your sync from Figma with the Amplify Studio, UI Builder, and then that's where you can say, well, I don't want to accept a change from Figma. I've already modified, things in this area. You can delete components from Figma, say, and do your sync, but it's gonna, if you've made changes to it locally and synced it up, it's gonna remain in your UI builder until you actually delete it from your UI builder. So that way, if somebody deletes an imported component that you've been working on, it's not going to override it and delete it out.
Did have a good question from the group as well. I'll just put it on the screen. So Devendra was over on the YouTube site. I haven't seen it this week. It's really nice. I've seen a couple of people come in from the YouTube side. We usually archive the videos there, but we've been trying to stream at the same time. So that seems to be working well. But Devendra has been watching. He's asked what the offline development experience is like. Like, do I need to rely on Amplify Web Studio to generate or regenerate? What's your opinion of that, Aaron? I've got my own answer there too.
So I would say generate, yes, originally. So obviously you're importing from Amplify. So you're going to need some connectivity to import down. Once you've done your import, you can work with them without having to be online. However, remember, you're importing your models here. So you're going to have limited view of the data because obviously your data is stored in DynamoDB. It's all through Amplify. But that's not to say, like here, we're importing the models, right? The model has been imported. That's not to say we can't provide seed data locally for the model to then query, so that when you've got an online-offline experience, you can set your developer key to say, offline, pull it from here, online, do the query to Amplify. Because this is the list component. So before we looked at the card component, here at the beginning of the list component is where we're actually importing our model. The rest of it is straightforward. It's just using the card and creating a loop, right? So you could basically specify the seed data that you want locally, or what do you guys take it as?
Yeah, I think like that's right with that area. But if you were using Figma and you needed to import some extra designs, or you wanted to tweak it or create something there, well, I think it's kind of reasonable to assume that you have internet access to do that when you're integrating between those two tools. Or if you've got a design team that's upgrading Figma and you need to resync it, you're going to need online connectivity to pull that down. You're not going to be running Figma locally on your machine and hooking that in. It's not designed to work like that at the moment.
So Figma is an online
is web-based, right?
UI.
So, yeah. I was going to say, like, once the graphics design team's given you, what you're going to use as a base, exactly like as Aaron said, right? Like, you can actually just use the local app sync mocking capability to mock some data locally, so you can kind of see what the look and feel comes up as. So I've shared the link to the Amplify page on that too. So you're probably going to, with Figma stuff, you are probably going to work between Amplify Studio and it. But once you've done that pull, it's up to you, unless there's a design update that's major that you want to take back into the equation, or you change your data source or whatever else. But at the same time, like I don't think I've done offline web development for a very long time. Like I was making apps on international plane trips as well, and it's like, you got data, like you're still connected to the internet. I can still do an npm install whilst on a plane. So there's not many places where I'm offline, and the iPad at the coffee shop, is pretty limiting as well. But I've still got 4G and I've still got Textastic, or the MacBook tethered to my phone. So yeah,
I, for fun, installed Ubuntu onto my Android mobile phone, and then you can I created a simple web app on my mobile phone on Ubuntu. So it's possible to run basically anything online or get connectivity.
Please tell me, Aaron, that you in that process you were using like an HDMI like dongle connected to a monitor, and you didn't actually like code it on your phone.
No, I was doing it on this phone.
Yeah,
it was very small.
My eyes would give away with that screen size and trying to.
I think you're going to have to show us that one day. I wonder whether we can have StreamYard on the phone in Ubuntu in a browser and share that screen. I think we need to do that.
Yeah,
and maybe we could power it by fire or something.
Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do
Well,
something, right?
to, to be honest,
I
to
mean,
be
I
honest,
think it does. I mean,
the reason
Matt,
I did it,
if you can, you should.
the reason I did it was because I was copying Paul with his Raspberry Pi setup with the VPC, and so for the Devember project, he had the multiple Raspberry Pis. I thought, I want to do this, and I've got a couple of Raspberry Pis, but I don't want to repurpose one. How else can I do it? So I thought, hey, I just need to install Linux onto my phone, and then I can do whatever I need to do. So I stupidly did that.
So to completely sidetrack you've got Linux running on that phone, and you can use your phone as the site-to-site VPN client.
Yes.
You need to specify what phone that is so that I can do this. Because Matt, you're completely wrong. Just because you can definitely means I should.
Well, I'll let you guys do that, and the most I'm going to do is like locally with Textastic or something on my iPad, or just SSHing into like a box that I've got somewhere.
We can
if
SSH
you guys
into
do
his
it,
phone.
If you guys do it, I want you guys to run Cloud9 as well, and I want to see like Sublime text on Ubuntu versus Cloud9 logged in a web browser on Ubuntu on the tiny phone, and let's see how you go.
Here's a question, Matt. This would be a good one for you, right? So Brave Cobra 2 says, quick question. Why would I choose to use Amplify? I never understood the use case for enterprise apps.
Can I? Sorry.
Do you want? You can take it, Aaron.
I want to. I want to jump on this. I've just come out of an amazing meeting with Accenture in the US. They are actually at this stage building out. I won't go into the details because it's probably commercial in confidence, but they're building out a SaaS application, right? So a really, really big SaaS application to run for their customers. But what they want to do is they actually want to handle a lot of the components that get developed or deployed into their customers' environment for the administrators the easiest way possible, right? So they're actually using Amplify to develop the administrative console to then go through and select the components that they want to use to deploy and the like. This has been basically they started with CloudFormation, they moved to CDK. They're now using a combination of CDK and Amplify to build out an incredibly powerful application as the control plane for a SaaS application that took them a couple of weeks, maybe cumulatively, to put together because they didn't have to go through and do all of the heavy lifting. They're relying on Amplify and CDK integration. They're relying on the way that all of the opinionated Amplify, it is opinionated, works to then go out and build. They've created custom data sources, and inside those data sources, they've got custom configurations that then deploy out through their pipelines to this SaaS application. All of that built on Amplify. So there's an example of a global systems integration, a global enterprise, and how they use Amplify. Yeah, there's other use cases in terms of customer-facing applications through Amplify, but I had to shout out to Accenture because they have done an amazing job in how they actually use Amplify to reach all of their customers.
Yeah, nice. And I've like to kind of build on that comment, but I'm going to rewind very quickly, just because I like some of the previous comments we got in a Docker container and Kubernetes and Raspberry Pi. It's got to be K-free, and then have to get the cardboard phone VR rig to code in. I was going to say I have coded on the Oculus Quest, so that's an interesting one, right? Like because you can get a very big view of like a 360 view of like what you're doing there. So in reality, VR is actually pretty fun to code in. I probably wouldn't sit into it all day, but yeah. So rewinding to the actual question, and I completely agree with Aaron, but my perspective on it is we have a lot of enterprise and large enterprise that use Amplify, right? There's a lot of teams that want to take on the benefits of the cloud, but they don't have access to backend developers within some of these customers, or they do have access to backend developers, but for particular projects, they just want to make things quickly to prototype, and then they'll still productionize it, and it'll be productionized with Amplify. So we've seen this trend over the last, like I'd say, 2 or 3 years, and Aaron, myself, Paul, we all work with enterprise customers, and I probably have at least 10 or 20 different meetings with different enterprise customers at all levels, right? Like banks, telcos, government entities. Like a lot of people are actually using Amplify for their applications. The UI components are great. Like if they're using Cognito, a lot of them are really interested in bringing app sync into their app. A lot of them are building React apps. And yeah, it's just an easy way to get started. And I think it's kind of like that no code to low code to high codes, if that's the term. I don't know, but like the enterprises are adopting Honeycode and so many different no code type apps and solutions as well, right? Like what's the other one that's going around all the time? Like building dashboards and stuff like that. But the no-code solutions are great for people that have Excel-based documents and are writing macros, and they're not really developers, but they've got this outcome that they need to achieve in their team within this large company. So no-code kind of really fits into that place. I don't think it's scary for developers, and it kind of means that we don't have to kind of lean in and invest time on these smaller sections of the business that still need to kind of innovate and have some kind of automation brought in so they can be more effective at their jobs. Low code, kind of expands on that. It's like, well, we still want a bit of development love. We still want to customize this to our exact needs, and we're going to do a little bit of code there. I'd say Amplify sits on the in between high code and low code. So, it's a front-end team with limited back-end team resources, or that team's focused elsewhere is where I see a lot of the customers kind of lean in. And the front-end team really want to own the end-to-end space. They want to own this application end-to-end. And so they usually take on Amplify. But I know, Aaron, you look like you wanted to enter in as well. But I've even seen just large teams adopt it for their applications overall because they want to move faster.
I'll just reiterate the point, the low code. This is the only code that I've produced for this proof of concept. Yeah, it's a pretty simple proof of concept, but from that point of view, I pulled in 2 components, 2 that I haven't even modified. So we can go through and start modifying that in the UI builder, and 1 that I have modified, and all I'm doing is setting a property. That's it, done. Import use. So low code, absolutely. The other one was another great example that I had. Before Amplify Studio was available, I had a customer who had a very large enterprise system and no real administrative interface to actually get in and do some very simple administrative tasks. We got in and designed an Amplify. So the article that I wrote, I think 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago now, how to integrate existing AWS resources into an Amplify application. That was written based off this customer of, they just wanted to get up and running first. They didn't have the time or the runway. They've got resources, but they were all busily working on other things. They just needed to very quickly get an administrative console up and running so that they could quickly do some administrative tasks, provide some logins for a few different administrators so that they could log in and do it. But they didn't want to have to go and set up, user pools and all these different things. And that's where we got in with Amplify. We said, bang, here you go. Cognito user pools through Amplify Auth. Set up your functions by, you've already got your up and running system. All you want to do is start pointing to your existing APIs. And, once they've authenticated, you've got a button here, click to do, basically click ops, and it will fire off a query to your existing API that they've integrated into their application. They didn't have to take days or weeks to develop the application. Within a couple of hours, they had an up and running administrative console that they could then log into and use. And then over time, over the last year and a half, they've developed it into something much more, which is now a control plane for their large application, or their large system, I should say. It's a distributed system. But if they had the Amplify Studio back then, it would have been even simpler because they wouldn't have had to go through and create the GraphQL schema. They wouldn't have to have gone through and run through all the API commands, CLI commands. It would have been just, create app, develop my model, create app sync, import my data source, which is going to be another API, or talk directly to an API, a REST API that already exists in my account. Done. import into a React app and host. Done.
Yep.
Can get it done. Get it done in an hour or two.
And it's not just proof of concept, because, like, Matt, we know, I've helped somebody recently, and they were very traditional, and they were hosting their application on, EC2 instances. Deploying behind Nginx, very manual step, SSHing to machines, moving code around. They wanted to get up quick as possible, their front end team, to have multiple environments, the staging environment password protected, the ability to merge into master and have it redeploy and do blue to green and have SSL managed for them. And they took their existing app, packaged it up into Amplify. They weren't using any of the other features of Amplify, but just leveraging that, and they saved themselves weeks worth of hours of work to build all the pipelines, all the supporting platforms around it, which open them up to having that extra time to do extra development work and to set up whatever they need in the future. So it's used in so many different areas, as well as, Matt and I know somebody that has built a fully fledged ticket selling platform on top of Amplify, and then they're out there, they have a business, they employ people, they're running their business on the back of Amplify. So it's not just for quick proof of concepts, it's not just for internal tools, it's for real world applications.
Yeah, I think 5 years ago it was only for prototypes, right? But the last 3 years to now, it's really changed. The other thing that I was going to say, and I think we're Amplify fanboying a bit too much again, especially me and Aaron, right? Because we help customers with Amplify and AppSync a lot during our weeks. And I know Paul loves it as well, of course. But, I've worked with many different BaaS backend as a service type platforms before. And the thing that's always attracted me to Amplify is the fact that you can break free when the time's right for certain things. Like sometimes you want to do something very advanced and very custom with CI/CD, and you can just step out of that. Sometimes you don't want Amplify to host everything for you on CloudFront and S3, and you kind of want to do something custom, and so you can kind of break free there. Sometimes you just want to use the libraries for Amplify, very particular libraries too. So you use it to kind of engage the existing assets that the backend teams created, let's say API Gateway and Lambda and whatever else. So it's a really flexible system, and I think one of the things that Studio was the big announcement, the big graphical thing that everyone's like, wow, during reInvent, right? But the thing that I was geeking out about was you can actually have two-way CDK now, right? Like I can choose what I've created with my Amplify assets. I can choose to export that to something that's going to be compatible with CDK. So I can kind of have a CDK stack for everything I've created in Amplify. And vice versa, Amplify can also in the CLI read the stack. So this to me was the thing that I loved about reInvent. It was like, okay, now it's awesome, right? Because everything else that I'm writing with CDK in my infrastructure, now Amplify fits in that perfectly, and I can bring assets in and out pretty easily, and that just gives me that overall confidence and escape hatch that as my app grows, and suddenly I have this really crazy haired thing that's going to help my business grow, but I'm going to have to do some really weird stuff with technology. I now have that freedom to go, okay, I can do that really weird stuff, and I can kind of break out of the flow that Amplify gives me to get started really quickly and just start using the underlying resources in more of a creative way. Escape hatch lost. Yeah.
Do you remember how they found that hatch, in Lost, if you watch Lost? Every time I hear someone mention it, and I think it's you mostly, it always comes to me.
Yeah.
And, what you're doing, yes, we do come. We're all from the land down under.
Yep.
So yes, we're all in Australia.
When I think of escape hatch, I feel like I'm an Apache helicopter, and I've just pressed the button to eject the seat, and then I have full control of where I'm going to land in the water, and hopefully someone will come save me.
Yes, the SRAM. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. The flight from Oz to US explains the Linux. Absolutely. It's handy to have a Linux console when you're in the middle of a flight.
Yeah, that's right. Excellent. Well, I think it's a wrap today. And Paul, if you're really excited about App Runner and you've got spare time this week, Love to kind of have a look at that new feature. If not, we'll bring up one of the other projects that we've got in the works as well for next week's episode. 2 weeks time, just reminding myself because I have the memory of like, Dory.
We have Raspberry Pi and a Tesla.
Raspberry Pi and a Tesla. So that's going to be interesting in how that fits together, and how you'd use a Raspberry Pi and a Tesla together. So I'm really looking forward to that. That will be one of our colleagues, Josh, hopefully. So he's got the Tesla. None of us are rich enough to have Teslas just yet. But he's got a nice Tesla, and he's going to try a couple of things with his Raspberry Pi, and probably understand the data coming from Tesla, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so something like that. He's got some interesting use cases around that. I was sidetracked by looking at all the questions.
Yeah,
we always get so many questions. We always get so many questions at the end. What you're doing in Daily Push and Saram, like make sure you come back next week, re-ask those questions, and we can talk all day about Lambdas. And like whatever other questions you've got to do, but yeah, because we're already over time at the moment. So yeah, look forward to next week. Hit us up, search for us on LinkedIn, or comment on the YouTube channel. We'll follow up. We love to hear what you are all interested in. So let us know. Like we can dive into it, and if somebody's got a really good use case and is interested, we'd love to have you on a guest on the show as well at some point in time.
Yeah, happy to have guests. We've got things scheduled until the end of March as well. So if any of you that are watching have any ideas on a topic, just message us on LinkedIn or Twitter or the YouTube channel as well, and we'll be able to find an SME that can kind of come in and talk about it. We'll find someone that's done something interesting on that topic. We've done that in the past with a lot of people. But at the moment, we're looking pretty free towards the end of March as well. So bring your ideas to the table, and we'll get people scheduled in.
Yeah. So Joey, Dan, hit us up on LinkedIn, and we'll chat to you there, and we'll work out whether we can get you guys on as a guest if you're interested, and you can run us through something that's interesting to you. So. So thanks, Matt. Thanks, Aaron. This week was awesome to go through and see Amplify, like hands-on, see how it works, Amplify Studio. And super interested to install Ubuntu on a phone.
Nice. So and Paul, like just because you're not in your shed, right? Like for people that haven't joined every week, Paul's been moving house. So I'm guessing in like 4 to 8 weeks, once you've gotten a friend to run Ethernet to your shed at your new property, we'll see you rotate into your shed, right?
Yeah, well, I've kind of got the shed set up enough that it could kind of work, but at the moment, I'm sort of trying to take my kids to their old school, and so there's a transitional period at the moment. So soon I'll be back in a shed or a cabin.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you same time next week. Feel free to chat to us during the interim on Twitter or LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever. I'm happy to have a chat. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.